32, I reflect on my childhood with my younger brother, who is now 28. Our father, 56, raised us, but he always favored my brother. This favoritism began in middle school, and over the years, I learned to accept it. I never fit my father's vision of an ideal son. Unlike him, I wasn't into sports or other traditionally masculine pursuits. Instead, I was a devoted mama's boy, drawn to activities that he deemed unmanly. I loved reading, singing, and experimenting in the kitchen. When my dad pushed me to play football with him, I struggled and soon realized that we were growing apart. My brother, on the other hand, embodied everything our father desired, a tough, adventurous kid who relished rough play. It was evident that my father's affection lay squarely with my brother, who received endless praise, while I was often overlooked. My mother, however, was different. She loved us both equally, and I cherished her for that. Despite my attempts to bond with my father, he seemed indifferent to reconnecting after we drifted apart. Then, in 8th grade, tragedy struck. My mother, the glue that held our dysfunctional family together, passed away unexpectedly. By the time we learned of her battle with cancer, it was too late. Her loss shattered me, and I spiraled into grief. My only refuge became the kitchen, where I poured my heart into cooking, drawing inspiration from my mother's exceptional culinary skills. She had often confided in me that, had circumstances been different, she might have pursued a career as a chef instead of taking over her father's business. Cooking became my solace, especially as my brother and father offered little emotional support during my mother's passing. They buried their feelings, becoming even more distant, while I longed for the kind of closeness that a normal family shares in times of loss. My father grew increasingly frustrated with my passion for cooking, frequently urging me to leave the kitchen and engage in more masculine activities. One day, his patience snapped, and he threatened to assign me all the household chores if he ever caught me cooking again. We had a heated argument, during which he insisted I should be more like my brother. When I told him he had never truly loved me, it felt like a harsh truth hanging in the air. That moment marked the last genuine conversation we shared. Afterward, it was clear he had resigned himself to indifference, and I finally stopped trying to earn his approval. For the next few years, I isolated myself in my room, studying new recipes and listening to music. I was determined to succeed as a chef, not just for myself, but in honor of my mother. During this time, I spoke to my dad only when absolutely necessary, and my brother mirrored our father's indifference. With my mom gone, I felt utterly alone. When it came time to apply for college, I decided to apply to both traditional universities and a few prestigious culinary schools. I knew I had to take the chance, even if I doubted my dad would support my decision. That summer, I interned at a restaurant, gaining valuable experience that eventually led to a letter of recommendation. I was thrilled to receive acceptance letters from several schools, including the top culinary school in France. However, this meant I would need to ask my dad for permission, which filled me with both excitement and dread. I braced myself for a possible refusal, but I was unprepared for the outright rejection I faced when I approached him. My father, despite being wealthy, declared he wouldn't pay for my education. It wasn't a matter of finances. He didn't want my achievements to overshadow my brother, who was struggling academically. It was a cruel reality that left me in shock. I couldn't comprehend how a father could crush his child's dreams so callously. The argument escalated quickly, filled with hurtful words, and ultimately led me to leave home and move in with my mother's older sister, my aunt. The only thing that had kept me from moving out sooner was my nostalgia for the home I had shared with my mother. My aunt lived far from my high school, which made the prospect of changing schools unappealing. I confided in her about my father's refusal to fund my tuition. Although I felt embarrassed asking for such a large sum, she assured me everything would be taken care of. I will always be grateful to her for rallying enough support to cover my culinary school tuition. To make the most of the opportunity, I worked part-time while studying. Once I arrived in France, I poured my heart into my work, eventually graduating as one of the top chefs in my class. A few months later, I landed a position at an upscale French restaurant, and I gradually repaid my aunt by giving her half of my wages. Fortunately, I managed to avoid student loans, which might have been a burden I couldn't have handled. After several years in France, I saved enough money to return home and pursue my dream of opening my own restaurant. Back in my hometown, I became the head chef at another restaurant while continuing to work towards my ultimate goal. Finally, I achieved that dream a few weeks ago when I opened the restaurant I had envisioned for so long, partnering with two friends from my time in France who became my co-owners. When they gave me the chance to choose the restaurant's name, I felt a rush of excitement. It was a fortunate coincidence that they were also from my home state, making it even more special to start this journey in my preferred city. I decided to name the restaurant after my mother, a name that was both beautiful and unique in our city. At last, everything was falling into place. A few days ago, we held a modest pre-opening celebration for a select group of guests. I invited my aunt and a few of her friends who had helped with my tuition. Naturally, I included a handful of my school buddies, but that was it for obvious reasons. My brother and father were not invited. I hadn't spoken to them since leaving home, and they hadn't reached out either. It seemed better this way, but I knew that, eventually, they would come around to take advantage of my success, and that's exactly what happened. Since we shared the same last name, security didn't stop them when they arrived an hour before the event was set to begin. Their claim of being there to surprise me turned out to be partially true. I was genuinely taken aback when I saw them. They greeted me with warmth as if our past grievances had never existed. For perhaps the first time, my brother and father seemed genuinely happy to see me. As they stepped inside the restaurant, I froze. My friends, sensing my discomfort, wisely gave my family some space. I appreciated their instinct to step back, as the initial shock still rattled me. Then, just when I thought I had processed their unexpected presence, they presented me with a gift. My father announced that he had commissioned a portrait of my mother to hang in the restaurant. He claimed that the moment he learned a new restaurant was being named after her, he knew it had to be my project. He insisted he always believed in my potential. My brother chimed in, showering me with compliments and expressing pride in my accomplishments. I was astounded by their words, waiting for the other shoe to drop because it all felt too good to be true. Surely, there had to be a hidden agenda behind the sudden warmth. Eventually, they got to the point. My brother had found a job as a bartender, thanks to my dad persuading a friend to offer him a position at his club. During high school and college, my brother's grades had plummeted, and he failed to secure the lucrative job opportunities my father had envisioned for him. His lack of effort in high school football meant he missed out on a sports scholarship, leaving him to attend community college instead. Now, despite having done nothing to earn it, they wanted me to consider making him a partner in the restaurant so he could have a more prestigious title. I fought back the urge to laugh at their audacity and instead told them I would think about it. Of course, I had no intention of doing so. I simply wanted to delay my rejection. I wanted them to stay for the celebration, as I had a plan brewing that would shine a light on their opportunism. They were grinning, clearly pleased to have re-entered my life just as I was achieving my dreams, blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. As the evening progressed, guests began to arrive, and within an hour, everyone I had invited was present. My brother and father mingled with the crowd while I did the same. To my dismay, I overheard them boasting about me to others, their audacity leaving me speechless. It was time for my partner and me, the hosts, to make a toast. I wanted to save the best for last, so I allowed my friends to speak first. When my turn finally came, I was ready to voice everything I had kept bottled up. I started by raising my glass to my mother. the driving force behind all my accomplishments, and thanked each of my guests for being there. I genuinely believed that the confidence I carried into adulthood stemmed from her unwavering faith in me as a child, a belief that had endured even after her passing. After honoring her memory, I shifted to the true purpose of my speech. I expressed my gratitude to my aunt, acknowledging the financial support I had received from her and her friends that made culinary school possible. Then I turned my attention to my family, the very reason I had needed that support in the first place. I reflected on my upbringing and how my father often criticized me for my so-called feminine interests, like cooking, never once showing me love or encouragement. I recounted how he refused to pay for my education, fearing I would overshadow my brother, his golden child, a perfect replica of himself. This was the catalyst for my departure from home, but ultimately, I had triumphed over all the obstacles they had placed in my way. In a way, they had contributed to my resilience, which might have gone undiscovered had it not been for the challenges I faced. As I spoke, I noticed several guests casting disapproving glances at my brother and father, who at least had the decency to appear embarrassed, though I knew their shame was likely feigned. After I finished my speech, I walked over to embrace both my brother and father, mimicking their earlier demeanor. "This game is played by two," I said, pretending to forgive them for the past since they had come to celebrate my success. I even extended an offer to my brother, proposing that he take on the role of bartender at my restaurant. To everyone else, it seemed like a genuine reconciliation, and as I concluded my speech, the applause rang out, accompanied by a few whistles from the crowd. But deep down, I knew this was merely a performance, one I executed with precision, designed to highlight their shortcomings while showcasing my achievements. They wanted to storm out in anger, but instead, they were forced to pretend to be appreciative, smiling through their fury. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and it was time to leave, my brother and father confronted me outside the restaurant. They were visibly enraged, and I could see tears of frustration welling up in my brother's eyes. They demanded to know why I hadn't simply rejected their request for partnership if I had no intention of granting it. I chuckled, telling them that this was my way of making up for all the years of wrongs they had inflicted on me. It was precisely the reckoning they deserved. Even as I heard my brother sob and declare that this was the cruelest thing I could have done, I disagreed with my aunt, who suggested I had overstepped and should have just sent them away immediately. I felt it was just payback for their mockery of me over the years. Despite my aunt's belief that I had been too harsh, I decided against reaching out to my family to apologize. I wouldn't pretend to feel guilty for my actions, I truly didn't. When they came to the celebration, they had their chance to apologize but chose to remain silent. Although my aunt hasn't brought it up since our conversation, she still thinks I shouldn't have acted as I did. I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree on this one, and that's perfectly fine with me. In other news, my brother has been spreading disparaging remarks about me behind my back to our former classmates. We went to the same high school, which complicates matters since I've started receiving strange texts from students confirming his allegations. He's been telling everyone that I served them food that was 3 days old at my restaurant, humiliating both him and our parents. It's hardly surprising that he's embellishing the story to paint himself as the victim. While I wouldn't typically let such small rumors bother me, I can't afford for potential clients to take his lies seriously. I reached out to my brother, threatening to make sure he lost his current job if he continued spreading false information about me and my business. I simply don't have the time or energy for this kind of drama, and I'm hoping my threat will put an end to it. This is the last thing I need while I'm working so hard to build my dreams. In a second update, my brother replied to my text with a laugh, stating he wouldn't stop until I made him a partner. The level of delusion is astonishing. Isn't it absurd for him to trash talk the restaurant he supposedly wants to join? It feels like my father is manipulating him into seeking a high-profile role without putting in the effort. Unfortunately for them, they can't make it work with me. I threatened to have my attorneys contact him if he didn't cease his antics. He's not in a position to negotiate with me. While I haven't filed a lawsuit yet, I want to avoid unnecessary drama. I'll take action if he tries anything further. This will serve as his final warning. I realize it's been over a month since my last update. Life has been so hectic that I haven't had a moment to share what's been happening. Although my brother has stopped disparaging me, he and my father are still eager to capitalize on my success. A few weeks ago, they came to my house, trying to intimidate me. They claimed they'd spoken to a lawyer and threatened to sue me for naming my restaurant after my mother. They insisted I make my brother a partner if I wanted to avoid complications. Once I recognized how ridiculous their claim was, no lawyer would take on such a ludicrous case, I decided to call their bluff. They seemed to forget that my mother was more than just my dad's wife. She was my mother. I had every right to use her name. I warned them that if they didn't leave me alone, I would have to call the police. At that point, I'd had enough of their nonsense. Things almost escalated when my dad stopped my brother from grabbing me by the collar. It was clear he was losing his cool, probably due to the humiliation of it all. I wasn't the one at fault here, and they were lucky I didn't call the police right then. I demanded my dad come outside, but he insisted he wanted to speak with me alone and sent my brother to wait in the car. Once we were alone, my father tried to control the situation by saying my mother would be disappointed in me if she knew what I was doing. What he really meant was that I should just let things go. I told him to leave me alone. I couldn't take any more of his manipulations. Trying to invoke my mother's memory was a new low, even for him. We had long since passed the point of forgiveness. I couldn't understand why they expected me to forgive them without an apology, especially since they had never expressed any regret about how they treated me regarding my mother. I doubted she would have been proud when my dad refused to pay for my tuition. If anything, that would have upset her just as much. My father should be the last person to lecture me on what my mother would or wouldn't approve of. I know she is proud of me, no matter where she is, and nothing my dad says will change that. On a positive note, business is thriving at my restaurant, and I have plans to expand soon.